Good evening and welcome to Casio's webinar series on equity in education. My name is Caroline Lang. I'm the Senior Sales Manager for the East Territory and your moderator for the evening. As a long-standing member and supporter through scholarships of both Benjamin Banneker Association and TOTOS, Casio is proud to partner with them in these important discussions. The title for today's webinar is ICUCARE, Making Equity a Reality in Your Math Classroom. We are honored to have Dr. Pamela Seda presenting today from BBA. For the sake of webinar quality, we are keeping everyone muted and all videos turned off except for the presenters. If you have a question or comment, please type it in the chat panel and make sure to send it to everyone. This webinar will also be recorded and available on Casio Education's YouTube channel and the BBA website. And if you needed, a certificate of attendance will be available upon request. Also joining me today is from Casio is Amy Chow, who is our National Training and Product Manager, and Karen Greenhouse, who's a Casio spokesperson and consultant. They will help monitor the chat panel, relay any questions asked to the presenter, and before we begin the session, I would like to take just a few minutes to share some ways Casio is supporting education. So we have created the Casio Cares program to support educators, parents, and students. We've extended free access to our emulator software until December 31st, and we have extended our free online training through October 31st. Additionally, our always free web-based dynamic math software, ClassPad.net, is extending free access to its add-on functionality of AP Statistics and the computer algebra system through the end of the year. Casio has always provided high quality and affordable technology for everyone, and most recently we have released our newest graphing calculator, the FX9750G3, to continue to address the technology access gap and support students, parents, and teachers. To learn more about our Casio Cares program, calculators, and software, please visit our website, casioeducation.com. And now we have Ms. Kim Romaine from BBA to share their mission statement and introduce our presenter. Kim?
Hi, thank you. My name is Kim Romaine. I am the Southern Central Region Director for BBA, and I just want to tell you a little bit about our organization. The Benjamin Banneker Association is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to mathematics education, advocacy, establishing a presence for leadership and professional development to support teachers in leveling the playing field for mathematics. Our vision, that's fine, you can go ahead.
Sorry.
You can find out more information there at that email address there. Our vision, all children, particularly African-American children, have access to the highest quality mathematics education that empowers them to gain the self-confidence, enthusiasm, and endurance needed to succeed in mathematics and to transform themselves and their communities. I'm excited to present to you Dr. Pamela Seda, who used to be the Southern Regional Director for BBA. And Dr. Seda comes to us, she's been an educator for over 30 years. She received her bachelor's degree in mathematics education at the University of South Florida. After completing her master's degree, Dr. Seda also completed her PhD in mathematics education at Georgia State University. Her dissertation, Equity Pedagogy in the Secondary Mathematics Classrooms of Three Pre-Service Teacher, continues to provide an instructional framework for increasing the mathematics achievement of underrepresented groups. She is passionate about providing positive mathematical experiences for students who have not previously experienced mathematical success. For her, success is not simply passing a class, but rather being able to use mathematics as a tool to reason, analyze, communicate, and open doors of opportunity. For this reason, she continually seeks to help students experience mathematics the way she did, as something powerful, positive, and empowering. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Seda.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to take over the screen. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see that. All right, so ICUCARE, making equity a reality in your math classroom. So I want to just tell you a little bit about, in addition to what Kim said, I want to let you know I am a mother of 4 adult children. I've been married for over 30 years, and that's my family there. So it's very much a part of who I am. And I remember when my kids were growing up and they were wondering, why are you spending all this time doing all this work? And I said, you know what? I want every kid to be confident and know that they are good at math just like y'all. So just want to introduce to you my motivation for the work that I do. All right, so what are our goals for today? That you'll be able to identify the 7 elements of an equity framework, and that you'll be able to identify how each principle contributes to the equitable outcomes in the math classroom, and that you'll be able to identify at least one strategy that exemplifies each principle. All right, so we're going to do a little poll here. Which definition of equity do you like best? Let's see. Do we have the poll ready to go?
Oh.
We forgot about the poll?
I don't think sorry, I don't know that I got the poll. Sorry.
Yeah, I was like,
They can just enter it in the chat panel. Yeah, in the chat panel.
Okay.
Sorry.
Fine. All right, so let's see what we got here in the chat panel.
lots of A's and D's.
Okay. Fairness or justice. And then A's and D's. Okay. All right. Well, it's obvious that different people have different ideas about what equity is. After I share my framework, we'll see how your definition lines up with my equity framework. All right, so why is an equity framework important? Well, there's several reasons. One thing is that if we do not attend to the inequitable structures, even though we may implement good math instruction, even though we may do the practices and all that, if we don't attend to the inequitable structures that we have, then it's not going to help our marginalized students. And we also know that, especially because of COVID-19, if you go into a school, teachers have a myriad of decisions to make, and there are constant demands made on their time. And without a framework, oftentimes equity just gets put on the back burner. So that's one of the reasons why we decided that to do an equity framework. All right, so the 7 principles of equity pedagogy, as Kim Romaine shared, they came out of my dissertation research, and this was a framework that I used to study student teachers and to see which principles were they able to implement. And ICUCARE is just the acronym, so that can help you remember. Include others as experts, be critically conscious, understand your students well, use culturally relevant curricula, activate, assess, and build on prior knowledge, release control, and expect more. Now, even though the acronym is ICUCARE, we're going to start with the big be critically conscious piece because all the other principles rely on this one. So we're going to start with the C, even though it's the second principle. All right, so being critically conscious basically means that it has 2 parts. The very first part of being critically conscious is being aware of the negative stereotypes and how they impact your students. There are negative stereotypes everywhere in our society, and it's real important that you start thinking and studying about how do those negative stereotypes, how they might impact your students. And then the second piece of that is think about what are you going to do about it? It's making a commitment. So in the language of the kids nowadays, they say, oh, well, we need to be woke. So it's an awareness. So one of the impacts of stereotypes is stereotype threat. And there have been over 300 studies that have shown that when students from marginalized groups are exposed to a negative stereotype, that even though everything else may be the same, students who are exposed to that negative stereotype, it depresses their performance. It doesn't matter whether it's a stereotype about women, women in science. It could be even a stereotype about white males in athletics. Whatever the stereotype is, there are over 300 studies that show that when that stereotype is activated in clinical studies, that the performance of the students who are part of the group of the stereotype, their performance is depressed. That's just one example. So what are some things that we can do about it? It's not just being aware, but it's also deciding to do something about it. And the reason that it's important is to understand that negative stereotypes impact all of us. Dr. Tatum, in her book called Why Are the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? She talks about stereotypes being like smog. It's in the air. Everybody breathes it in. Whether you're black, white, doesn't matter. Everyone breathes in these negative stereotypes. But we all have to be responsible for cleaning it up, even though we may not have been responsible for it. So this goes beyond whether what's in people's hearts. It's beyond whether we think people have ill intentions. It's a part of our culture, and we need to actively work against it. So one of the ways that you can do that is be aware of the status in your classrooms. What do the mathematics classrooms look like? And recognize that you have high status students and you have low status students. Oftentimes those low status students can be there not just because, sometimes it is because of their math ability, but sometimes it could be because they're English language learner, or because they're a special ed student, or because they're black, or from whatever marginalized group. And assigning competence is a method where you as the teacher use your power to up the status of a low status student. So for example, if you're engaging in cooperative work, you can look at a student's work and see their contribution. So it also begins with the fact that you must start with tasks that rely on a wide variety of abilities, not so narrowed where it's just one particular skill, but open-ended tasks that require the ability to solve problems, the ability to organize work, the ability to be able to calculate, several different skills. And when you see a low status student engaging in one of those skills that is helpful towards solving that collaborative problem, you publicly recognize it. And you can say, you know, Lewis, I noticed that you drew a picture that was very representative of this problem. Tell me a little bit more about what you were thinking and how you were thinking about that problem. And so then that gives Lewis the opportunity to be able to share their thinking. And what you have just done is you've assigned competence to Lewis, and that has now increased his status in the eyes of the rest of the students. That is just one example. Another example is to have a growth mindset classroom. Now, I've noticed I said classroom and not necessarily growth mindset for your students. You can't really control what goes on in the minds of your students, but what you can do is you can control the environment. You can control the environment, and how you structure your class is growth what is valued, or right answers what is valued. And one of the things that I have found is a major impediment to learning mathematics is that fear of making mistakes. Some students have such a fear of making mistakes, they don't try. So I have this poster, I used to have this in my classroom. It says mistakes are expected, respected, inspected, and corrected. And I constantly refer to that, even when I made mistakes. Now, I wish I could say I made mistakes on purpose so that I could make kids more comfortable in making mistakes, but I just made mistakes. They weren't on purpose. I just made mistakes just like everybody else does. We're all human. And, but whenever someone made a mistake, I would point to the poster. Mistakes are expected, respected, inspected, and corrected. And this really helps support a growth mindset. So I want to give you just a little time to think about these questions. I want you to consider these questions and put some answers in the chat box. So I'm going to give you a chance to, and you can answer whichever one you want. Put your answers in the chat box. I like that heterogeneous environment. That's real important. Student choice. Yes, oftentimes we design lessons either with our high students or our middle students. We think about those low status students and how can I up their status? That's a good one, yes. Different entry points, absolutely. Open-ended tasks. Yes, knowing the math very well. Yes, that's real important so that you can connect it. If you don't have a good grasp of the math, then it's hard to connect it to students' prior knowledge. Yes, universal design. Parallel tasks. Thank you. All right, y'all had some great ideas about being critically conscious. All right. All right, so now we're going to go back to the first letter in the acronym, include others as experts. So as I said back with Be Critically Conscious, it's being aware of how negative stereotypes impact your students and then making a decision to act on that. And so the rest of these principles are actions or some things that you can do as a result of that critical consciousness. So the I is include others as experts. And include others as experts basically says you create classroom environments that extend beyond the teacher as the sole authority to develop competence and confidence in others as experts, including the students themselves. And so traditional classrooms, the teacher is the authority in the classroom. And rightfully so, as we said before, you need to know your content, but you can't be the only expert because that robs students of the chance to develop their own expertise as well. So it's real important that teachers consciously seek, how can I build the expertise of my students? And sometimes it can just be as simple as when a student asks a question, you choosing to defer to your students and allow them to answer the question rather than you answering the question. I know for me, that is such a hard thing to do because I've just been trained. That's just part of my being, is to answer to students' questions. But one of the reasons why I have this picture here is because I love the fact that, you know, most parent-teacher conferences, even the teacher is the expert on the student. But in this one, the student is their expert. Like, who is better to share with their parents their progress than the student themselves? So that's why I really like this picture that I have here. All right, so there are two examples that I use to include others as experts. This first one is called Find Someone Who. It's a Kagan cooperative strategy where you just, you could use any worksheet or whatever. I just arrange these quadratic equations in a 3x3 matrix. Doesn't have to be 9. But the key is students then go to someone and have them explain how to do the problem. Now, the student does the writing, but their classmate explains what to do. Now, what makes this so powerful is it normalizes asking for help. Everybody's receiving help, not just the low status student. And then what I've also done to use this as an opportunity to build the competence of a low status students oftentimes I'll select the problem that I know is particularly hard. And I've told my students, you can use me as an expert, but I can only be used for one question. I only get to be used for one question, and you have to use your classmates to be experts on the other question. I will oftentimes go to a low status students and I'll say, do you need my help with number 5? And I will show them how to do number 5 and explain to them how to do number 5. And then next thing, when those high status students don't know how to do number 5, I'll point out, Lewis knows how to do number 5. He can explain if you're looking for somebody who can do number 5. Because I had the chance to explain it to Lewis first, Lewis now becomes the expert. I just can't tell you what that does for kids, that they've had the opportunity to teach a high status student because this activity has been normalized asking for help. Another activity that I've done is the community, getting input from a community. So oftentimes I might have a project that students have to do, and I've created this rubric that I get input, and I say, I need you to find someone in your community, somebody who's employed somebody else or somebody who has people that they work with. And I've asked them to go and get input from a person in the community. And I have found that it's very helpful that they recognize the expertise that actually lives in their community. So this is just an example of a rubric that I used when I was teaching algebra. All right, so I'm just gonna give you a few minutes just to look over this and just answer one question if you'd like. So I'd love for you to put some of your responses in the chat box. You know, I'm gonna do just like I do with my students. I'll wait. I have wait time. I can wait. Yes. Thank you.
They came all at once.
Yes, I know people were thinking. So just that shows you, case in point, you have to be patient. Gifts and talents. Yes. Pairing students together. Guest speakers. And I don't think we, especially now in the day of Zoom, we can definitely take advantage of guest speakers. A lot easier now. Open-ended tasks. Yes. I love it. Different superpowers. Valuing understanding versus just simple answer getting. Yes. All right. Well, thank you. All right. So our next principle is understanding your students well. And understanding your students well has to do with learning about your students, their families, and their communities for the purpose of improving instruction. So I'll tell you the story about, this was actually one of the teachers, I was doing this workshop, former district, and one of the teachers shared about how she had this low status student that had failed most of the tests and had really struggled in her class. And then there was this test that she gave, and he just did well. He just had one of the highest grades in the class. So she was kind of, you know, wondering what was responsible. So she went to the student, she says, so, you know, why do you think you did so well on this test? And he says, oh, it was about grocery shopping. I do all my grocery shopping for my family. So I knew all the examples that were on there, I knew how to do it. It was easy for me. And so on one hand, she was really excited that she was able to tap into that, but then she was also sad, and she says, if I only had known that earlier, if I had known that I could just put some grocery shopping examples and connect this to grocery shopping, then they might have done better. So that's just an example of how understanding your students well can make a difference. So one of the things that I do is, well, obviously, this is where the social emotional learning comes in. It's really, really important to build positive relationships with students. I've also do a student interest survey at the beginning of the year. And so some of the questions I ask, yes, I get the parent information because I know on the first day of school, that's my best chance of getting a good phone number. But I ask questions like, what are qualities you look for in a teacher? What are you passionate about? What is one big question you have for the year? What are your strengths and how can we utilize them? And one of my favorite is, what is one thing you want me to know about you? And I have found that asking that question gives me so much insight that students just share things that I just probably would have never even thought to ask. So I usually do this, at the beginning of the year. This is a Google form that I've actually used. And so it really does help me understand my students outside the classroom, because there are human beings outside the classroom. They're not just students. They're not just math students. They have lives outside the class. And if you figure out and understand what's going on outside the class, then you can figure out how to make connections to the mathematics. So I'm just going to read these questions and read these questions. Then we can, we'll go on to the next one. So just think about, what attitudes and beliefs might you have that inhibit your ability to get to know your students more broadly? And what kind of activities do your students participate in outside of class that might create good context for meaningful mathematics activities? All right. So I used to sometimes just go into the cafeteria and sit down at the lunch table with kids. Of course, they would look at me crazy. But I found that just sitting at the lunch table and just listening to them talk, I would find out all kinds of things about students. All right. Use culturally relevant curricula. Using culturally relevant curricula has to do with using instructional materials in ways that help students see themselves as doers of math and help them overcome the negative stereotypes and messages regarding who is mathematically smart. So I shared this picture here because one is, math has such a negative connotation. If you think about, a mathematician, who do you see in your mind's eye? An Albert Einstein looking guy with crazy hair, white male. That's generally what we see. And oftentimes that image of a mathematician is in direct contrast to what most teenagers see themselves. Teenagers or even children, they want to be cool. And in their minds, mathematicians are the antithesis of being cool. So I'm sharing this picture because this is a picture that was taken at the National Organization of Minority Architects. And the young lady in purple is my daughter, because I wanted to share a story with you. Yeah, she was the child of a math teacher, so she was going to be good in math. She was also very artistic, though, and I recognized that at a very young age. She was very good in math and science. She was also good in art. And I mentioned that to her early elementary school. I think architecture would be a good field for you. She was like, no, it just wasn't even on her radar. She wasn't interested at all. But she went on a Girl Scout field trip one summer, and she actually met a female architect, an African-American female architect. And after that, from like 6th grade on, she said, I want to be an architect. And as you can see at that picture, she is one. She is an architect. She currently works for an architectural firm. And I just shared that story to say that representation does matter. And it is real important that your students are able to see themselves in the math curriculum. So I'm going to share this video with you. Make sure that I have, okay. So Hopefully you can hear this.
I think that culturally competent teachers think of their students as a group of people from whom they can learn. One of my colleagues at Northwestern University, Carol Lee, talks about a classroom in which she was studying teachers, and the teacher that she was working with would always say, you have to study the students. And that's what culturally competent teachers do. They don't presume that just because a student is of a particular race or ethnicity, that they already know what that student is like. Even if that race or ethnicity is exactly the same as theirs, they literally study the student, and because every group of students is a new group. I mean, one of the mysteries, how do we start to think about kids' potential? The 11th grader who walks in with the hat on backwards and the looks like the next rapper, or the 5th grader who comes in threadbare and poor. How do we think about their potential? Who do we think these youngsters are going to be? It turns out most of us are pretty poor judges of that. So a culturally competent teacher knows there's no point in making an assumption. I always say to my own students, do you actually think that Martin Luther King's 4th grade teacher said, oh my goodness, Martin Luther King Jr. is here? She probably said, this is Reverend King's son. I guess I had to work with him, but, these preachers' kids are maybe a pain in the neck. That's a very human response to have. But it was Martin Luther King. But you can't know. So you don't know where the next cure for cancer is coming from. You don't know where Bill Gates is sitting. You have no idea where Toni Morrison is. You don't have any clue that Cesar Chavez is sitting there ready to, at some point in his life, lead farm workers. So you have to teach as if they're in that classroom. They're there somewhere. That's what you see among culturally competent teachers, this pushing and stretching of kids because they have no way of knowing, where the next genius resides. One of the teachers in my study had a wonderful sign outside her door, and it said, quiet, geniuses at work. So she had this visible symbol that she shared with the school community, but with her own students about who she thought they were. She was constantly telling them how smart they were. Even when they were struggling, she would say, okay, but you're smart. The other thing that you often see among culturally competent teachers is their understanding that there's probably more expertise distributed in the classroom than there is within any one person. So much of their work is work that helps kids collaborate and become more interdependent to work with each other.
All right, so one of the things that I think about being culturally relevant, you cannot be colorblind. And I think about when I say colorblind, there are people I remember growing up, and I've heard lots of well-intentioned people say, oh, I don't see color. But color blindness basically makes it seem like there's something wrong with a person's color. And even though a person may be well-intentioned, when you don't acknowledge a person's race, you're not acknowledging their culture. You're not acknowledging a very big portion of who they are. So it is important to, as Gloria Ladson-Billings was saying, recognize the culture, but don't make assumptions. Don't assume that because all Black students believe a certain way or act in a certain way. It is studying your students, learning about who your students really are. So two ways that we can do this is there is a website called Mathematicians of the African Diaspora. And because there is such a negative stereotype about mathematicians, this website is an awesome website, and it shows Black African descendants in as mathematicians. And one of the things that I did with this website is I asked my students to identify a mathematician on this website and study them and answer some questions about them. And they put it they did an actual presentation on them. And I had them reflect about, did you find value in this? And why do you think I gave this assignment? And they all said, yeah, we understand why you gave this assignment. It helps us, understand how important mathematics is and that what we can do and what we're capable of doing. So that was very encouraging to hear from my students. Another book, Women Mathematicians, Women Who Count, by my colleague, Shelley Jones, who is on I've noticed she's participating in this webinar. So shout out to Shelley Jones. This is a great resource to see African-American women mathematicians. So there's Agnes Scott College also has a website specifically for women mathematicians. So I even just remember recently seeing a movie, Radioactive, about Madame Curie. Yes, she's a scientist, but it's important that marginalized groups be able to see themselves represented in the curriculum. All right, so I'm just going to give you a little time to answer these questions. In what ways can you help your students see themselves in the curriculum? And curriculum is textbooks, assessments, software. And how can you engage all your students with the math curriculum in ways that help them overcome those negative stereotypes about who is mathematically smart? So I'll give you a little time to answer in the chat. Yes, Kendall, thank you for reminding me about Erica Walker's book, Beyond Banneker. I love it. Mathematicians, thank you, Jennifer. Mathematicians are not just white dudes. Thank you. Being great, Revender, being participative, thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter, thank you, Taylor, assessing your curriculum before you present it. Sometimes you just need to take a look at it. And now that we're in this digital age, it could just be as simple as putting a different picture in there. And oftentimes, we'll just have naked math, but it's good to add pictures, and we have control to do that. Write about problems about things, Colleen Carmen, write things about things that kids care, yes. Make sense in their own lives, absolutely. And the research shows that when you ask kids questions about things that they already have prior knowledge about, whether it's things that they know from at home or things in the community, they do better. Lisa Lamb said, getting to know students first and then designing problems on that basis. Yes, on that student interest survey. Yes. Representation does matter. Yes, Shelley. Sean, you said finding places where you can incorporate more of the real stories of mathematics that include many different cultures and histories. Absolutely. Absolutely. Joseph, you said understand that we can all learn through different processing mechanisms in time, though they differ. Yes, we can all learn. And I think that is very important to communicate that learning takes place over time. Wow, y'all keep coming. Yes, the crest of the peacock, Kendall. I remember studying that in my graduate program. Karen, yes, allowing for many approaches to problems. All right, thank you. All right, so we'll go on to the next principle. So we've done I, C, U, C, and this is A. Assess, activate, and build on prior knowledge. All right, so this principle has to do with valuing the prior knowledge that students bring to the classroom, both personal and cultural, and using that knowledge as a resource for creating new knowledge. So one of the stories I like to tell about this is how I had a friend of mine who was a math teacher who was from Jamaica. And even though he was Black like his students, he still came from a different culture. And he was a calculus teacher. And what he used to do is he used to ask his students, okay, I need you to teach me slang word for the day. And they would teach him a slang word. And he would learn their slang word. And then what he found was when it was time for him to teach the calculus vocabulary, they were very open and just as willing to learn the calculus vocabulary because he was willing to learn their slang words for the day. So it's real important that we assess, activate, and build on the prior knowledge of students and not assume that students don't know or come with blank slates. And that's what oftentimes happens is we just assume, oh, they don't know anything. And so sometimes we end up reteaching things that they already know. But other than that, sometimes we can't even build on their prior knowledge because we don't even know what that prior knowledge is. So it really is taking the time to assess, what do my kids really know? And then if they don't know, it's engaging in activities where we can activate that knowledge. Because if you don't use it, you lose it. We all know that. So sometimes that knowledge is buried in the back of our heads, and we need to engage in activities that kind of bring that up so that you can build on that knowledge. So there's several activities that I've used. One thing I call 3 facts and a question. It's my variation of notice and wonder. I will oftentimes use it to introduce a new topic, and I'll just put a picture up or a graph up or problems up. And I say, give me 3 facts and ask me a question. I found that when I make it a little bit more precise like that, give me 3 facts, or sometimes I say, give me 5 facts. It makes them focus a little bit more. Sometimes notice and wonder, they may notice the color of something. And even though that's okay, I found that the 3 facts in a question helps me get them to think about, pay attention to what do they see there. If I do 5 facts, it even forces them to think a little bit harder. I found that they're like, I can only think of 2. And I'm like, okay, well, I need you to keep at it until you get to 3, or keep at it until you get to 5. And I'm able to use that to activate their prior knowledge. And oftentimes when I have them share the things that they see, what questions they have, then I'm ready to use that information to introduce my next lesson or the next topic. And I find that it's a really good segue to activate prior knowledge. One of my other favorite activities I do to activate prior knowledge is guess that word, or a variation of math password. So what I just do is I put vocabulary words on strips of paper, and then I turn them over, and then I give them to one student. I might put students in groups of 4, and the first person just pulls out the first vocabulary word, and then they give clues to their classmates, and the classmate has to guess what that word is. And then whoever guesses the word gets the strip of paper. And then they take the group, they pass the set of terms to the next person in the group. So the next person gives clues to the rest of the group. And whoever guesses that word gets that strip of paper, and then they pass it around. So every person gets the chance to be the clue giver, and every person gets the chance to be the clue guesser. And after all the words have been guessed, whoever has the most strips of paper at the end of the game wins. My kids love this game. They really love it. It's very engaging. Teachers love it too when I do it at workshops. But it's a very fun game. But what I find happens is it activates prior knowledge. Sometimes they may not understand the mathematical meaning of the word, but they'll tap into what is the everyday English version of the word. And then when I hear them do that, then I know, okay, but there's a connection. I can make a connection with that everyday meaning to the mathematics. I also found that even if a kid doesn't know the word, they're learning. They're hearing the clues. They're hearing the other person guess. So it's a review as well as building on that prior knowledge. So that's an activity that I love to use. So here are 2 questions to consider. How can not taking the time to assess or activate prior knowledge of your students perpetuate inequities in your classroom? How can not taking time? And what analogies can you use to connect prior knowledge to abstract math concepts? So I was just thinking of an example of one thing that I used to do was I talked about, I had a friend who used to sell jewelry, and I was trying to help her learn about fractions. And I would say, well, you can't add fractions that don't have like denominator. It's like if I have 3 bracelets and 2 necklaces, I can't combine them and have 5 bracelet necklaces. That's no such thing. But what I can do is I notice that those bracelets are jewelry and the necklaces are jewelry. So I can say these are 3 pieces of jewelry and I'm adding it to 2 pieces of jewelry, and now I have 5 pieces of jewelry. That was something I was able to connect in an analogy I could use to help her understand why adding fractions with the same denominator was important. So I'll give you a little time to answer those 2 questions. Which one doesn't belong? Love it, Jennifer. I love that. Which one doesn't belong? And that's a great activating strategy. Yes, Michelle, I like that where you said some students may not have the academic connection, but they have a real life connection, and you can use that to teach them. Yes. Yes, Jennifer, when you talked about the shopper and being able to connect that to the math. Kim, thank you for activating. Without activating students' prior knowledge, teachers making too many assumptions, thus holding more power. You're absolutely right. We're going to talk a little bit about power in the next principle. Taylor Cook said you can start with something small so they know and then build off that. Yes. Thank you. Love it. Great ideas. All right.
Dr. Seda, you have about 10 minutes. Just
okay, thank you.
To let you know, no problem.
Thank you. All right, so we've done ICUCA and now R, release control. What is releasing control? Empower your students to take ownership of their own learning by focusing on sense making and allow them to make choices about things that are important to them in the classroom. Now I'm going to focus on sense making. So it's not giving up your power, it's sharing your power as a teacher. And so many times it's interesting. Yes, I was a traditional teacher too, and I understand this is probably one of the most difficult principles for me, is because we just love that sense of satisfaction that we get, that we know that we helped contribute to that light bulb coming on. But the more we control the learning and engage in those practices where we are the center of the classroom and we control all the action, the behavior, and all the talking in the classroom, then can we be surprised when they don't take ownership? And I still have to ask myself that question, is like, how can I expect them to own the learning when I have all the control? So it's about sharing that power with your students. And that's really modeling democratic society, which is what we want them to be a part of. But we have to model that. And it's not being, it means going from my classroom to our classroom. I'm a part of this classroom. I'm an important part of this classroom, but so are you. So some things that I've done for regarding releasing control is, one is I let them choose board buddies. So oftentimes I will randomly select students, and I know that that's controversial, doing cold calling, randomly selecting students. I've still done the randomly calling people because I need my students to know that everybody is accountable for learning in this classroom. But when I call on a student, I always give them the chance to select a board buddy. They can select any person in the classroom to go up to the board with them and talk to them, or select anyone to the classroom to answer a question for them, not for them, with them. So board buddies I have found to be very, very useful. That gives them the control. Even though they couldn't get control being called on, they could control who they asked for help to answer the question. Another activity that I've done are card sorts. One of the reasons I think card sorts are so important and powerful in releasing control is because it gives students the opportunity to start where they're comfortable. You know, sometimes when you're given a worksheet, you start with the first problem and the kid doesn't know how to do it. All of a sudden, they get anxious and then their brain shuts down. And they're like, I don't know how to do the first problem, so then I probably certainly can't do the second one. Whereas with a card sort, they'll pick up a card, oh, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. And they can pick the cards that they're comfortable with and start. So here's an example of a card sort that I created. It's around the multiple representations of a graph. I call it VANG, V-A-N-G, which stands for verbal, algebraic, numerical, and graphical. And what I did was when I gave this to students, they could start with whatever representation they wanted and match the other 4 representations. And I found that this was so much more powerful than giving them a worksheet and giving them rules. Because, you know, in times past, I used to say, okay, this is how you start from the equation and this is how you create a table. And then this is how you start with the equation and you create the graph. And then I think traditionally I never put the word problem with it. That was just something that I very seldom did as a traditional teacher. But as a card sort, you really are given the power to your students about where do I start, and then they help support each other in doing this card sort. So that is just an example of 2 things that I've done to release control. All right, and so here are some questions to consider. What keeps you from giving more control to your students for their learning? How can you overcome these obstacles? How might you remove the fear of making mistakes from your classroom? And what structures or routines in your classroom might communicate the wrong message that the answer is more important than the process? Yeah, it's real important to communicate to students that sense making is more important than just getting the answers. And unfortunately, because of time, I'm not going to have a chance to stay here, but I know that you're putting some great things in the chat box. And I will stay afterwards to answer questions if you like. But I want to get to the last principle. So we did I, C, U, C, A, R, and E. Expect more. The last one is expect more. We know that we all should have high expectations of our students. So what is expecting more? Hold high expectations for all students and avoid a deficit view of diverse learners. And what that means is, oftentimes, it doesn't mean that you ignore kids' weaknesses or their gaps or their shortcomings. It doesn't mean that you ignore those. But what it means is you don't see students in terms of their deficits. What you do is you look at and say to yourself first, what does this kid know? What do they know first? And I know that's a shift. I know, being a math person and studying math all these years, I might have the whole problem right and my eye will just focus on that one mistake. And that's what I've kind of been trained to do. But this is asking us to do the opposite. Start off with, what do kids know? What are they good at? What are their gifts? What are their talents? Start off with an asset-based approach. And then after you start off with what they know, then you build to, how do I use what they know to fill in the gaps? How do I use what they do know to get them where I need them to go? That's what expecting more is about. And 2 ways that I do that is, one is the notion of that warm demander. And it's real important that that warm demander is the person who has high expectations, makes demands of their students, but they do it in a warm way. it doesn't mean that you let kids just do whatever they want to do. And so that's why release and control must be paired with expecting more. It doesn't mean that you just let kids sit in the back of the class and be quiet so that they don't disrupt class. It means that is part of the reason why I do the cold calling, because I have high expectations for all my students, and they know that any point in time, anyone can be called on. But it's that warmness, it's that that communication to you that I'm calling on you is because I know that you can do it. I know that you're capable of doing it. It's real important to communicate that message, especially to students from marginalized groups. And the other part that is real important is that we reinforce, we don't rescue. And what I mean by that is oftentimes we feel like we're helping kids who are struggling, especially struggling students. We rescue them. We give them easier work. I've even heard in my district people say, oh, well, the way I differentiate is they can't do the problem here, so I give them easier problem. That's rescuing them. That is not expecting more. Expecting more is leaving the bar high and providing the reinforcements or the scaffolds that students need to get there. Sometimes it may be, rather than graphing by hand, it could be putting a graphing calculator in your hand. It does require you to be very clear what that learning target is so that kids can get to that learning target, but it is really about providing scaffolding. And one of the scaffolds that I've provided to help students with math discourse are the talk moves. And I think many of you have probably seen it. It's from Math Solutions, is I provide these for students, and it helps them engage in that math discourse. It doesn't let them off the hook and then say, oh, I can't talk about the math. No, okay, we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to teach you how to talk about it. And so you say things like, oh, well, I would like to add on. I think the answer is because. I agree because. I disagree because. These sentence stems are really good for scaffolding that math conversation and expecting more out of your students. So here are some questions to consider. What behaviors might communicate low expectations to your students? What causes you to rescue students prematurely by giving them the answers or telling them what to do? How can you make sure you do not lower the cognitive demand? Excuse me, I'm sorry. How can you make sure you do not lower the cognitive demand of tasks when your students struggle? All right, so there we have the 7 principles. ICUCARE. ICUCARE. All right, so you can't have a math class without a test, right? Okay, so this is your test. I want to start off with which ones are false. Just take a look at it. Maybe you can just write down which ones you think are false. So I'll be quiet so you can read. All right, did you get them right? Did you identify the false ones? Okay, so number 1 is false because we do not want the teacher to be the expert all the time, right? We want them to see their classmates as experts as well. So that's why number 1 is false. Number 4 is false because that is ascribing to a colorblind stance. And we need to acknowledge the racial and ethnic identities of our students because that's a part of who they are. And we can take advantage of those cultural references to help them learn mathematics. So that's why 4 is wrong. 6 is wrong because it's not giving them all the right answers. It's about sharing of power. That's what release and control is. It's making sure that you share your power as a teacher with your students. So it goes from my classroom to our classroom. And then the last one is wrong is we shouldn't start with what their misconceptions are. We need to start with what do students know. When we're analyzing student work is what do students know? So that is the end of my presentation. I want to give you the opportunity to get the handout. I've got this as a, the slides. You can get the slides, and you can just go to tinyurl.com/ICUCARE. I'm going to go ahead and type that in the chat as well, and that way you can just click on the link. tinyurl.com/ no, let me put the www in front of it. ICUCARE 0826. Now it is going to ask you to subscribe to my newsletter on my website. And I realized I didn't give you my website on there. So my website is www.pamseda.com. And there's some others. I have other resources. I have the games, the Vang. I have some Vang cards there. I have some mathematical practice posters. I have some other things on my website, so if any of you are interested. But thank you so much for participating. I will stay on for a little bit for if any of you have questions. If anybody wants to ask some questions in the chat.
Well, just a few housekeeping issues, Dr. Seda, but thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I mean, you really gave us some food for thought and a charge to create, you know, this inclusive, equitable approach to teach all students, so high, low, and in between, and to honor all levels, you know, of, learning skills. So I was truly inspired. I took so many notes. I need to go back to the classroom, Dr. Seda, so I was really, really inspired by what you shared with us this evening, and we are so appreciative of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank Kim and BBA for your partnership in this endeavor, and thank you to those of you who joined this evening. And just a few housekeeping issues. As I said, as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on Casio Education's YouTube channel and on BBA's website. If you need a certificate of attendance, please email calctraining, which is on the screen, at casio.com. And we will continue this conversation on September 8th about equity in education with Dr. Toya Frank, Dr. Janice View, and Mr. Jay Bradley. So for those of you that want to stay on and ask questions, we welcome you to do so. We will stay on till every question is answered. And for the rest of you, have a great evening and see you next time.
Hi, this is Karen. I just want to pop in. Someone asked about the chat, and I will save the chat. And so in the follow-up email that everyone receives tomorrow, you will get the link to the recording, the chat, and other links that were shared. So just so everyone knows that that's coming.
Yes, I noticed that Taylor had said I need to write a book, and I am in the process of writing a book with Kimball Brown. I saw he was on, my co-author. We are in the process of turning this into a book. So hopefully next year, early next year, it will be available. So thank you for that encouragement, Taylor.
There's a question from Joseph in the chat. What shifts would you recommend to create systemic standardized emphasis on equity?
Probably the biggest shift that I would make is, I'm trying to make it sound so it's asset-based instead of, so what I see oftentimes is such a focus on compliance, and teachers are so driven to follow, you know, what's laid out for them and compliance. And what I would shift is let the focus go from being compliant to focusing on our kids and how are we engaging our kids, and what is the impact of whatever I'm doing on my students. And that just means we're just going to have to start thinking and filtering everything we do based on, okay, now how does this impact my kids? And what do I need to do about that? And what adjustments do I need to make if I don't like the impact that this has on my kids? I just think there's so many things that we do that we just do it. That's because that's the way we've always done it. And So I'm just even thinking about how the very first day of school, I had teachers say, I want to give the pretest on the very first day of school. And I said, so what message is that communicating to your kids about what's important to you? So those are just little things like that. They probably never even, that top teacher probably never even thought about that question. That we're constantly communicating what we value and what's important to us. And I think we need to start thinking about how does our actions impact and what does it communicate to our students, as opposed to just being compliant.
Absolutely. He said redesigning our metrics and evaluate tools. I hear you. Thank you. Okay, any more questions for the wonderful Dr. Seda?
I saw somebody asked if they can share the link to the recording with students, so I guess that's a Casio question.
I answered that, yes.
Yes.
The link is just on a YouTube, so it can be shared with anyone, yeah.
Yes, I'm just trying to go through Dr. Seda and see if I see any more questions. Just lots of thank yous and great jobs, Dr. Seda.
Well, thank you. Thank you to everybody who participated. It was great seeing everybody answer the questions and participate and support each other. So I had a great group.
Yes, and thank you again. Yeah. So no questions. I guess
I think we are going to go ahead and close it out. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Seda. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you. I felt privileged to be here.
Have a wonderful evening, Dr. Seda. Thank you again.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.